The first 36 hours of free agency has been a complete whirlwind. But how does it impact everyone from a fantasy perspective? Fear not, Tom and myself are here. We're going to break it down by team, transaction by transaction, to make sure you are in the best place to take advantage, whether that be Dynasty, Best Ball, or you just want to know for all your redraft leagues ahead of time. Tom, let's dive straight in it. The big move at quarterback. The Dolphins obviously moved on from Tua, paying $99 million in dead money to see him walk out the door. They proceeded to then go and hand $67.5 million to Malik Willis to create Green Bay South. I guess, first of all, let's start. How do you see the fit of Malik Willis in this Bobby Slowick offense?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because I think a lot of people expected Miami to chase someone like Kyler or Geno Smith or Kirk Cousins, who you could potentially get on a vet minimum deal with offsets being paid by another team. So to go out there and actually pay someone reasonable money when you've got just an absurd amount of dead cap, when you're really struggling against it, I think it speaks very much to what Jeff Hafley, the new head coach, saw in Malik Willis in Green Bay. Obviously, the pair of them come go over from there. And I think it speaks to the fact that they really believe that not only can he play well at this cost, but he can be a good rate, a good return on investment, but also he can be the kind of guy who can help them establish that culture. Now, Malik Willis, it's been a long, winding road for him to get this starting job. You look back at his time in Tennessee, where he looked like he was completely washing out of the league, but he had Todd Downing and Tim Kelly as his offensive coordinators there. Now, neither of those guys have been an offensive coordinator in the NFL again since their spells there. We knew Matt LaFleur was going to be an obvious plus in Green Bay. Bobby Slowick, I have mixed emotions about. Obviously, his year with CJ Stroud, where everything went right, was fantastic. But in general, I don't think we look at him as a great genius. I think he's going to be good value for Jalen Waddle. We saw, particularly, you go back and watch the game against the Ravens, like he was absolutely lighting them up. I'm not sure that's necessarily what we're going to get from Malik Willis every week, but I think that he'll be steady enough to keep Jalen Waddle fantasy relevant. Devin Etienne is possibly a little more of a question mark because Tua just checked down so consistently across the small sample size we've got with Malik Willis. He's kind of targeted running backs at about 20% target share, which is kind of fine, but Etienne probably needs more. But hopefully he's intelligent enough and put in good enough position that he's able to make all that happen.
Yeah, I really like the fit because I think that, you think of the Shanahan, Bobby Slowick offense. It's going to be a lot of boots, a lot of getting the quarterback out of the pocket on the move. That's where Malik Willis has looked good, has looked competent. I think that if you're the Dolphins, you're tearing it down, you're in a rebuild situation, you've got no path to a quarterback. The one thing that matters over the next, I say 12 months, but probably let's say 24 months, is can they find an answer long-term at quarterback? To me, this is the exact move that the Jets did last year, which I was praising in terms of you take a swing on a guy that's got talent, that's got high upside. If it hits, great, you've got a long-term answer at quarterback. If it misses, it's not the worst move in the world. You can move on from it. And it's, you're not spending draft capital. You're not spending huge amounts of money. I think it's a sensible move. From a fantasy perspective, I think, to me, this could potentially make Devin Etienne slightly even more efficient, which sounds slightly ridiculous for maybe the most efficient back in the league. But you've got a guy that's got the athleticism and legs of Malik Willis in that backfield. Teams are going to have to honor that. And I think that hopefully, as long as Bobby Slowick's competent, it's going to open up even more lanes for our chain. The offense is returning a lot of people. 4/5 of the offensive line are back. Jalen Waddle's back. It's not like this is a completely torn down offense. They've lost all the pieces on defense. They've lost Tyreek Hill. They've lost Tua, but that really wasn't much last year. So I'm hopeful what this offense could be. And, we've seen it time and time again. A good offense with a terrible defense means great for fantasy. So we've got an underdog ADP QB 21 at the minute. Do you think, A, is that good value? And B, do you think that's going to rise over the next week or two?
I would absolutely put it nailed on that it's going to arise. I mean, I think that Malik Willis is going to be everybody's popular dual threat kind of sleeper, and everyone will come down to the why take Lamar Jackson, Drake May in the first 5 rounds when you could take Malik Willis in. He'll probably settle in, I'd guess, around 11, round 10, somewhere like that. Because when you look at what kind of rushing production that he's given, I mean, in 8 career games where he's played 60% of the snaps or more, he's rushed for at least 40 yards in 6 of them. And we've also seen the big play ability downfield. Like, that is, as you mentioned, with the bad defense, that's fantasy gold. So, yeah, I think that he's going to get pushed up very quickly now that not that we didn't expect him to be a starter, but probably now there's a little more confirmation about the situation, because Quinn Ewers is not taking any snaps away from this contract.
Yeah, and Ben Friedman's in the chat saying Etienne may be more efficient, but he'll lose carries and receptions, should move down to mid-second round. Is that as far as you'd go? And I'm not sure if I'd quite drop him that far personally, but where are you at? You're the best ball brain.
Yeah, I think that it's a tricky one. At the minute, Etienne's kind of going at, I think, 11th overall in ADP. Behind him, you've got James Cook, Justin Jefferson, Drake London, Trey McBride, and then you've got Saquon Barkley, who goes in the middle of round 2. So you kind of making the argument, do you drop him down as far as Saquon Barkley? I think that I could possibly push James Cook ahead of him. I could maybe, depending on if Kyler ends up in in Minnesota, then maybe you can make that jump. But yeah, he's firmly just for round 1, round 2 territory for me, and I'll probably wait and see how the market reacts as to whether I drop him any further.
Yeah, and then from a dynasty perspective, you can see on screen my previous dynasty value was a late first. I've bumped him up. He's about the 107 in the current draft right now. I've got him in the same tier as Jackson Dart, Kyler Murray, Daniel Jones, the guys I'm viewing as
guys don't like.
But it's guys that I'm viewing as high upside short-term starters. Like, I'm not expecting any of them to be a starter beyond probably 2 years, but they've got high upside, and I think you need to balance out that sort of QB2, QB3 in your dynasty rosters, certainly. Let's dive across to the next big move. Now, Tom, I feel like I've talked about it a few times this year. I was expecting a big number for Alec Pierce throughout the season. I thought he played really well. I thought he improved as a receiver. I think I put in our Discord about week 7, week 8, I reckon Alec Pierce is going to get paid $20 million a year. I did not expect the 4th highest guaranteed money at signing of any wide receiver, behind only Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and CeeDee Lamb. When this dropped, I was absolutely mind blown, gobsmacked. This was incredible. Do you think that we can trust Alec Pierce for dynasty and for fantasy now, or is this just a better and best ball when we're chasing spike weeks?
It's really difficult, and I think out of all the wide receivers at the top end of free agency, he's probably got the biggest range of outcomes, and a lot of it seems tied to Daniel Jones, who seems like he'll have a contract in place imminently. And by all accounts, Alec Pierce wanted Daniel Jones to be there and to be the quarterback of his team going forward. That was important to him. So can they kind of keep what they had going last year? It's really, I mean, it's not just 1 year where Alec Pierce was special. The previous year, he looked really good as well. But nearly half his yards last year came on throws 20+ yards downfield. Like, he hit over 1,000 yards, but had was it 64 receptions?
I don't think he's cleared 50 receptions in a year.
The number I had in my head was 64, but I might be wrong on that. It's really tricky to look at
47 receptions last year, 1,003 yards.
So, yeah, it's really tricky to look at a player with that level of efficiency and not expect some level of regression, particularly when you've got Daniel Jones coming off an Achilles injury. And Tyler's made this point a few times, whether it was on the Best Ball Show with myself or in our Discord. But we saw Kirk Cousins lost the ability to drive through the ball and deliver the ball deep. Is there any chance that Daniel Jones does that? If so, how much is it going to affect Alec Pierce? I think that's very fair. But he also finished last year as wide receiver 26, and on Underdog, he's going as wide receiver 39. I think that he's a complete value there. There's a lot of kind of hype going on with the beat reporters coming out of Indy saying that they reckon that the benchmark now is like 8 targets a game, and that's just simply unrealistic. Like there's just not many players who see 8 targets in the way that Alec Pierce does. So I'm a little skeptical, but I still want to buy in. And like me and Tyler last week on the Best Ball show, we talked about it, and I'd be comfortable taking him up to sort of like wide receiver 30 range.
Yeah, I can see Alec Pierce in best ball circles. I get it. You know, the spike weeks are there. He's led the league in yards per reception the last 2 years. Like, I get all of that. I can't get on board in managed leagues. Like, as you said, the Achilles thing, and people are talking about, well, you know, Aaron Rodgers came back and looked all right. Aaron Rodgers was a left Achilles tear. Kirk Cousins and Daniel Jones were both right Achilles tears. That plant leg is so much more important than the front leg when it comes to pushing the ball downfield. So, yeah, okay, we might see Riley Leonard to start the year. Are you excited about? Like, I'm a huge Riley Leonard fan. Like, I'm you know, one of the ones holding the candle for him, but I'm not excited about that. I just think that, to me, this is one of those where I feel like we talk about this every year around free agency. This is a better in NFL contract and a better in NFL receiver than it is for fantasy. Like, speed kills, deep threat kills. You know, this is the reason Tutu Atwell got 10 million last year. This is the reason why the Jets drafted Arian Smith in the 4th round. Like, for fantasy, it means nothing. But for an NFL, having a receiver that you need to honor, you need to be able to push deep, that is a big thing. And that doesn't necessarily mean to me that we need to be pushing him up crazy high in dynasty circles and crazy high in redraft circles. So whatever the price is, I'm pretty much happy letting him go to other teams, letting him go. You know, if this is a dynasty space, I'm happy to move. I've just looked up Keep Trade Cut. He's the wide receiver 30 on Keep Trade Cut, being valued around a mid 2026 first. Guys around him: Jameson Williams, Jordan Tyson, Zay Flowers, Jalen Waddle. Like, give me all of those over Alec Pierce every day of the week, quite frankly.
I mean, I just think that there's the potential without Michael Pittman there that things could open up a little bit more. Do they get a little bit more creative and work him in differently? And I fully understand that's, you know, a complete projection, but Michael Pittman being out of the way makes it easier for me to see him sustaining value and being good. But I'm definitely with you that there's a massive range of outcomes here.
Do you still think that this offense is still run first and, you know, it goes through Jonathan Taylor, or do you think we're going to see them lean a bit more pass heavy up that kind of pass attempt per game number and be a bit more of a modern NFL offense? Because if that's the case, then yeah, I'm absolutely with you. But I guess for me, I'm still thinking Shane Steichen's going to lean into the run. I still think this is Jonathan Taylor's offense. And even without Michael Pittman in fold, I'm not sure I fancy or trust any of these wide receivers hugely.
Well, I think it's so difficult to project what Shane Steichen wants to do, because for so much of the last few years, he's been feeling out what his quarterback rooms are capable of, what's going to work, what's going to be good. And then this year, we saw a good glimpse with Daniel Jones of how it might work. And then all of a sudden, you know, you get the Achilles tear, and it changes everything. Now, of course, yeah, even in those first kind of 8 weeks, the Colts ranked 26th in pass rate. They weren't massively pass heavy, but yeah, I guess you could say Lou Anarumo's defense is probably good enough that it's always going to keep things in check a little bit. They believe in Jonathan Taylor, but I think overall, I'm just comfortable enough with this offense. If Daniel Jones gets back to even 80% of what he was last year, I think that Alec Pierce is going to be fine.
Yeah. Remember, if you want to offer your thoughts, if you want us to answer any of your questions, dive in those comments below. We'll be talking through any of your questions live as we go. Now, we're talking about the Colts wide receivers. One Colts wide receiver that did walk out the door. Michael Pittman was traded to Pittsburgh in a late round pick swap. This, you know, we were talking in the members only Discord. This felt inevitable as soon as that Pierce contract came down. They couldn't pay both. The way Pittman's contract was structured, it meant that the Colts could easily move on from him. Pittsburgh throw a late round dart throw pick swap in order to bring him in and then pay him fairly decent money. 3-year, almost $20 million a year. I would expect an extension. He was on the last year of his contract. Like, you're not going to trade for a guy and not give him something because he's probably going to be unhappy. But yeah, it felt quite a lot, almost $20 million a year. I don't love this fit in Mike McCarthy offense. I'll be brutally honest. I think it's, you think of his offenses in Green Bay and Dallas were very kind of man-beating route heavy. And Michael Pittman feels that kind of guy that gets open versus zone over the middle and perhaps not a great route runner, not a great separator. But obviously Mike McCarthy liked something, thought he was a good fit. How do you feel about Michael Pittman from a fantasy perspective?
Well, I think the Steelers are aware that if they want to run the kind of offenses which Mike McCarthy likes, which tend to be multiple wide receivers in them, then they needed to do something. And taking a low risk pick swap, that really makes sense. And then if you're planning on drafting somebody in the first couple of rounds, then being able to pair them with DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman, that starts to look like a pretty decent wide receiver room. I mean, you look at the depth chart for the Steelers, and before Pittman got there, it was DK Metcalf, Calvin Austin, and then just about nobody. This team last year had likes of Adam Thielen, Marquez Valdez-Scantling on it. I'm not entirely sure whether they're trying to build out a team for Aaron Rodgers or whether they're still hedging their bets with him. Ultimately, if Aaron Rodgers is back, I'm not sure that Michael Pittman is going to be fantastic for fantasy. Like, you look, even last year, he only had 9 top 24 wide receiver finishes. We know that Aaron Rodgers likes to check down so much at this point in his career. And DK Metcalf really came along in really different ways last year to how we've typically seen him. So I think Michael Pittman's kind of I think he's fine, but I mean, at his price on Underdog of wide receiver 42, can you make an argument that maybe he could be a couple of spots higher, possibly, but I just don't think that I ever want to get involved with the Steelers until I see proof that they're not going to be a low tempo, low scoring offense.
I think for me, Michael Pittman's that wide receiver that you look at in drafts, whether that be best ball redraft dynasty, and you're like, oh, Michael Pittman, it's not the sexiest pick. It's not the most interesting pick, but he's going to be solid for me. And then you look back at the end of the year and you're like, that was really a wasted pick, because how many weeks did he actually do anything in my lineup? And this is when, for me, I'm always going to chase the upside, chase the potential. And yeah, it might burn me, but I can go and grab someone off the waiver wire. Michael Pittman, you're never going to be able to drop him. You're never going to be able to move off him. And I feel like he'll probably end up as like a wide receiver 4. And it just feels like it's painful. I can't hear you, Tom.
In managed leagues, it just feels like the most that you're going to be comfortable with is a bye-week fill-in. And if you can get him at those prices, then fair. But otherwise, I mean, this Steelers offense with Aaron Rodgers, it's never going to be electric on offense.
Absolutely. Balloon Line King has dived into the chat. He's saying DJ Moore looks like a steal to Buffalo in that trade after what the Colts and Pats paid Pierce and Dobbs. Major overpays. What are your thoughts on that, Tom?
Well, I mean, the way the Bills went around it with a late second round and then guaranteeing future money, I'm not sure that I look at it as a steal. I think when you look at the wide receiver market and you can say, okay, did Brandon Beane get a gauge on these prices and say, I'm going to have to be aggressive and I'd rather go with a known quantity, somebody who's played with Joe Brady before, then okay, I can kind of see that as being like, okay, it's fair, but steal might just be a touch too heavy for me, but I think he's going to be good this year.
Yeah, I'm going to really disagree with Blue Line. Sorry. DJ Moore is a good NFL receiver. The Bills are paying him $24.5 million a year. Like, it's not like the Bills aren't paying him. Like, that is a lot of money to be paying a guy that you have just also sent a second round pick for. Romeo Dobbs, I don't think we've had the exact breakdown of the contract. It's about 4 years, $70 million. Like, the difference between paying Romeo Dobbs sub $20 million a year and not having to spend draft capital on him, versus paying a second round pick for the rights to pay $24.5 million a year to DJ Moore. That feels pretty egregious to me. See, I'd rather Dobbs at his price than DJ Moore at his cost to acquire, I'm afraid. Sorry to disagree. Rico Dowdle was the other addition to Pittsburgh offense. Now, I was really hopeful we could see Rico Dowdle in a spot where he'd get a bit more of a workload, but he is going to split the backfield with Jaylen Warren. Straight up now, Tom, who would you rather, Jaylen Warren or Rico Dowdle for 2026?
I'll go with Jaylen Warren. I've been a Jaylen Warren slappy for a long time. I think that his receiving work and his ability to break away is still really good. I think Rico Dowdle is going to do really well. And ultimately, this is probably going to be, there's a couple of ambiguous backfields that we'll talk through in this one. I think that people will make strong arguments either way, but I'll want exposure to both sides of it. I mean, Dowdle on his part finished as RB21 in PPR points per game, RB16 in total points, 10 top 24 weekly finishes, multiple top 2 weeks, but there was very much that purple patch in the middle where he was going up against soft defenses where he went absolutely nuclear. Now, in the AFC North, are you going to get those kind of weeks? Maybe against the Bengals, but against the Browns' run defense, who were incredible last year, unless they regress heavily with new coaching, probably not. The Ravens' run defense, even last year, was fairly good for most of the season. So if you start banking those as your, 4 games a year where you're having a tough game, it gets a little tricky. I mean, look, the Steelers' offensive line is pretty good. I wouldn't say it's excellent, but I think it's good enough. And I just think that what we mentioned about Michael Pittman, I don't think it's going to be a pass-heavy attack. But yes, if you've got a lot of running backs being featured, then I'm happy enough to do that. And it's also noteworthy that Mike McCarthy saw this as a priority after the two had played together in Dallas, or been together in Dallas.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of natural crossover as well between Dowdle and Jaylen Warren. This isn't going to be a thunder and lightning type backfield. I think they're going to be pretty interchangeable. If I had to bet, I'd still lean towards Jaylen Warren like yourself. But if one of them gets injured, the other back could be huge for fantasy, because if we're going to see this entire backfield, we know that Aaron Rodgers likes checking down and likes getting the ball into the running back's hands. If this is just a one-man backfield, it could be absolute dynamite. So yeah, I'm certainly going to be sprinkling some shares of both of these guys into my best ball drafts, but also taking some flyers in Dynasty as well. Before we dive into perhaps the biggest riser in all of fantasy, if you are finding us for the first time, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. We're about to dive into rookie season, so we'll be doing rookie profiles of every fantasy relevant player you need to know. And of course, Tom and Tyler will keep you busy in those best ball streets. Hit that subscribe button right now. We'll then dive into Kenneth Walker. Now, I was really against the idea of the Chiefs spending a top 10 draft pick on a running back. I'm so in favor of this move. I absolutely love Kenneth Walker's fit in this offense. I hope we see a little bit more of a change in the run scheme, maybe a little bit more gap scheme runs. But look, this Chiefs offense, it lacked explosives on the ground. What is the one thing Kenneth Walker can do? He can turn any carry into a home run. So really, really excited about this fit. How high do you think Kenneth Walker could fit in redraft? I've seen some people suggesting that in redraft and best ball, he could be a top 5 back.
Top 5's definitely a little too spicy for me right now, but then you remember that at the minute, James Cook's RB5, and I could understand people possibly wanting to make an argument against him. He was the RB15 in Underdog ADP and going at 29th overall as of yesterday. Like, now he's kind of snuck up to RB11 overall. So like, it's already happening. Like, he's going to be moving up. I think that you could make an argument to push him towards the top of the second round. And because, this Chiefs offense, it was inept last year. Like, by explosive run rate last year, Isaiah Pacheco ranked 47th out of 49 running backs with 50 plus attempts. Kareem Hunt ranked 46th. Kenneth Walker was second. And I think Eric Bieniemy is going to be big for the ground game. Like, we've seen him be very good with running backs across the career. And like the Chiefs, they need that ability. I'm sure that it's not going to be a complete workhorse role for Kenneth Walker, because as we've talked about in the past, like the Seahawks rarely let him pass protect. So we don't know whether that's just something he can't do or whether they just didn't feel comfortable. But I would imagine they mix in some other people. Patrick Mahomes does tend to call his own number sometimes. So maybe top 12, the first round is a little bit too rich. But yeah, I think he's a slam dunk in the second round, and I'll have plenty of Kenneth Walker. And anyone who doesn't appreciate what Kenneth Walker's been over the last few years, you're just paying attention to the wrong stats.
Yeah, I've not been the biggest Kenneth Walker believer because I get the frustrations around and the things that he takes off the field. But in an offense like this, where they've got 5 above average offensive linemen, I don't think there's many offenses you can say that about in the NFL. They have got very good up front. Andy Reid is a genius scheming up the run game still, despite, having been doing it for 30 plus years in the NFL. And I just think that, yes, we might see a slight adjustment around. He's not going to get that receiving volume. He's not going to get that, crazy workload that we see from some of the workhorses that are first round picks. I certainly couldn't get him in my top 5, but this is a guy that I'd feel quite happy. If you can go wide receiver in the first round and come back and get Kenneth Walker as your RB1 in that mid to late second round, I think that's a great deal for me. In dynasty circles, he's jumped considerably for me. As you can see on screen, he was a late first. I've got him now worth a mid first. He's a top 10 dynasty back for me. He's jumped ahead of Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Chase Brown, Kyron Williams. Like, he's jumped up 2 tiers in my dynasty values. I love the fit. I'm really excited about what this can be. And just for the Chiefs, yes, it's bloody annoying, but I think this is a great move for their offense because they can now go and spend that top 10 pick on a true cornerstone piece rather than having to chase some upside at running back.
Yeah, and I don't think Jeremiah Love was making it to them anyway. I think, like, coming out of the combine, I said that I thought that the Commanders was the floor. Like, I thought that there was no way he was getting down to them, and I still think that's the case. So I think fair play to the Chiefs for making sure they didn't get left out.
No, absolutely. Let's take a quick hit before we dive into some other teams. Tyquan Thornton has come back, 2 years, $11 million deal. Travis Kelce's back 1 year, $12 million. Any interest, anything that's kind of moving the needle on either of those guys?
Well, I mean, Tyquan Thornton felt like an obvious role, a move, because he'd found a nice role in that offense. The Chiefs seemed to understand how they wanted to use him, and it seemed to be working. Like, they were good getting the ball to him downfield. So good for Tyquan Thornton. Travis Kelce, it felt inevitable that he was only ever going to be signing with the Chiefs. I never really bought into anything there. He did have his lowest receptions per game since 2015, but his yards per target jumped from 6.2 in 2024 up to 7.9 last year. He just looked in better shape. He wasn't fast by any means, but he was moving better than the previous year. The problem is, he's 4th in targets for 108th and 6th in receptions, but he hasn't scored more than 5 touchdowns in each of the last 3 seasons. So unless he can find more work in the red zone, he's going to drop down the top 12 tight ends, because we know how much at that position touchdowns just rule absolutely everything else pretty much. So I think he's a fine low-end tight end 1. Sort of tight end 8, tight end 12 territory, because it gets muddy in there, and I wouldn't begrudge anyone from sort of making a strong argument around there. But on the whole, it just feels right for him to be back there.
Yeah, and I think, look, this is an offense that I think isn't done adding to that wide receiver / tight end room. We've seen them consistently spend significant draft capital. When you think of 1st round pick on Xavier Worthy, 2nd round pick on Rashid Rice, 4th round pick on Jalen Royals, 4th round pick on Jared Wiley, Sky Moore, I can't think off the top of my head, 3rd round pick was he. That's 4 years of consistently throwing draft capital, and I still think they need another body in that room. So I wouldn't be shocked to see them spend day 1 or day 2 pick on a wide receiver, which could only potentially more eat into that target share for Travis Kelce. So yeah, he's in that sort of mix of tight ends where it's like, oh, I've probably got to take one. I don't feel good about any of these guys, but I feel like I need a tight end at this point anyway. But let's dive across to the Saints. They've been very active so far. Travis Etienne, the big deal, 4-year, $52 million deal. Haven't got any details around the structure, or I certainly haven't seen unless you have, Tom. Sounds like Alvin Kamara's gone. Sounds like Devin Neal. My hopes and dreams for him being fantasy relevant have well and truly been put on the back burner. But this offense is starting to look all right. You know, we've got competence at quarterback. The offensive line is still very good and returning a lot of bodies. Dare I say it? Are we a wide receiver away from the New Orleans Saints having an above average offense?
I think it's possible, yeah. I mean, like, I think that the offensive line is probably better than some people appreciate. Kellen Moore's influence is obvious. They play fast, lots of plays per game, lots of quick snaps, which is very useful for fantasy football. And it felt like the kind of perfect move. Like, I talked about this on the Dream landing spot video with Hayden, that I thought that Travis Etienne would just slot into this offense perfectly. They play a lot of zone concept runs, which Etienne averaged 4.6 yards per carry from. He's a good pass catcher. Well, maybe not an excellent, sort of like McCaffrey level pass catcher, but he's a good pass catcher. He's coming off probably one of the most consistent years of his career. Normally he's been like a half-season warrior. And I think that with the question marks over Alvin Kamara, who some reports suggest that he could retire or be traded, it makes sense to get somebody to carry the load. Now, yeah, they've got a collection of fine sleeper wish casting type running backs behind who we've both drafted far too often over the last few years. Maybe they add somebody else in the draft, but I think that this is firmly Travis Etienne's backfield, and RB18 overall on Underdog. He's a very easy click in the third round.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be shocked if they spent draft capital on a running back, given they've still got Devin Neal under contract. Kendre Miller's still floating around. If you're spending this much money on running back with those two guys and to back them up, I think you're probably all right there. I wonder if we're going to see some investment in wide receiver, which, let's be honest, would be great. I love Chris Olave. You know, I love me some Devon Vele, but I think they probably need another body in that room. But this is still a really good offensive line. They obviously spent big on David Edwards out of Buffalo, which I think is a huge upgrade for this run game as a whole. So, yeah, I think Will's up for Travis Etienne. I think we're going to see potentially more volume. We know that Kellen Moore is great at scheming up that run game. So I'm very excited about what Travis Etienne could be in this backfield. You can see on the screen there, Tom, running back 18 in Underdog, an early fourth round pick. Are you comfortable with that, or do you think that price could rise a little bit more?
I think you can probably bump him maybe couple of spots. Like, he was going behind the likes of Kyron Williams and Breece Hall, and I think you can possibly bump him ahead of those two. I've got no problem with that. But yeah, I mean, that's where running back question marks start to come in, and obviously people like to take a lot of strong stances there. My stance is that I want exposure to Kellen Moore's offense. And I just think, going back to just like the Kendre Miller thing, Kendre Miller wasn't drafted by Kellen Moore. He's been a complete miss. And I think when you throw in the fact that they're not going to have Taysom Hill around, who ended up absorbing a lot of carries last year, that they will need somebody who they feel like is their guy, who's a little more reliable as a backup going forward.
Potentially. It's interesting you saying those names, though, of the guys he's going around in best ball, because those are the guys I've got Travis Etienne in a tier with in Dynasty. He's in a tier. Breece Hall, Chase Brown, Kyron Williams. Throw a blanket over all three of them. I think they're all pretty much valued the same. Now, I'm looking at the show sheet here, Tom, and this sums up your fantasy love, your fantasy thought process. You've got quick hit here. Noah Fant signs a 2-year deal with the Saints. This is proper sicko street, disgusting stuff. Yeah, I guess is this just so it's an excuse that you can talk about Juwan Johnson?
Well, I just think it's worth mentioning in brief, because despite your hatred of Juwan Johnson, this is the guy who finished as the tight end 8 overall last year.
I was the original Juwan Johnson guy. This
tight
is what's
end
painful.
12 in points per game. So look, I mean, I don't know how I've become painted as the Juwan Johnson guy, but like I appreciate tight ends who can score points. Noah Fant has never been one of those guys, but it probably just takes a little bit of the ceiling off Juwan Johnson.
Yeah, I think look, the Saints consistently just throw bodies at that tight end room. I think is Foster Moreau still floating around in there somewhere? I think he's a free agent. He's a free agent, actually, isn't he? So yeah, maybe. Who knows? Who knows? Let's move on to one of the other big spenders in free agency. Brian Dable's got his wish. His slot receiver of his dreams, Wan'Dale Robinson, has been signed for a, quite frankly, ridiculous 4-year, $78 million deal. First 2 years pretty much fully guaranteed. Look, Wan'Dale Robinson has been fantastic for fantasy in the last 2 years. When he's been on the field, he's produced because the volume has been absolutely historic. Do you think that he could see similar volumes with Cam Ward, who, let's be honest, Cam Ward peppered the slot quite a lot in college?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it, the volume just being ridiculous. He's had 140 targets in back-to-back seasons. Now, when you zoom out from that and look at how many different quarterbacks Wan'Dale Robinson's played with over those last 2 seasons, it's clear that this isn't just like, I don't know, like a Snoop Huntley hammering Mark Andrews kind of situation. This is a multitude of quarterbacks who are looking at Wan'Dale Robinson on the field, seeing what he gives them, and choosing to absolutely pepper him. So it's hard to argue that he doesn't earn volume. And you know, with Brian Dable there, then yeah, obviously this isn't like the highest ceiling kind of move, but Ward needs guys. Like Ironman is nice, DK is nice. They're both interesting young rookies, but I don't think either is a particularly great receiver yet. And I think that they need someone like Wan'Dale Robinson. And really, they could do with somebody else. They could do with going and getting Juwan Jennings or somebody to just give a second option, or drafting somebody high, because Cam Ward needs a lot more support than he's got right now. He doesn't really have a great option at tight end either. Like, they just need bodies, but with the addition of somebody like Wan'Dale Robinson, at least they have a better chance at moving the chains and staying on the field. And the moment that Ward gets to make more plays, then that should help this whole offense, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, Roy's in the chat saying, what was Dable thinking? I get it, because, as I said, Cam Ward peppered the slot hugely when he was down in Miami, and I think it is a part of the field he likes to target. My challenge is that I think this wide receiver room, they're throwing a lot of resources at it, and I'm not sure they're answering the question. You know, is Wan'Dale Robinson that much better than Chimere Dike, who I think flashed as a rookie? You know, that's a 4th-round pick that was phenomenal in special teams. I think I would rather go and throw money at Romeo Dobbs or something like that and give you an outside receiver, and you can still see the development of Chimere Dike. Like, I don't like throwing money at slot receivers when I think the NFL is moving towards, you know, bigger bodies, more tight ends on the field. And I think we're seeing slot receivers faded out. So it feels like a low upside move for fantasy. Wide receiver 47 price, it feels cheap given the production over the last 2 years, and maybe that's it. Maybe it's worth, you know, a dart throw, because, as I said, this is a guy that the offensive coordinator knows incredibly well and has gone out and got for a reason. So maybe we do need to look at that price and rethink it. But it as I said with Michael Pittman, I guess this just feels like a really dull pick, and we want to have.
Well, that's it. I mean,
fantasy.
You know, you've got your dynasty value of like early to mid 2nd round pick, but like I don't think I've ever seen Wan'Dale Robinson traded in a dynasty league.
No, he because it's dull, isn't it? Who sits there and goes out, do you know what? I'm going to go and buy Wan'Dale Robinson. Like, the only times I've ever seen him moved is a throw in as a deal. Like, he's a piece to add to a deal. He's not the piece that somebody goes out to be like, I'm going to get Wan'Dale Robinson. And he's also not the piece that you can be like, right, I'm selling high on Wan'Dale because people are going to want him. Like, it's just a bit meh, isn't it? And I guess, as I said, wide receiver 47, it does feel light for a guy that's commanded the volume over the last couple of years. So maybe I need some shares, but I don't feel particularly excited about it.
Yeah, well, let me pull up where he's going in Underdog ADP and like the guys around it, and let's just have a quick talk about that. So, yeah, he's got wide receiver 46 now, so he's climbed one spot in the last day. The guys ahead of him: Xavier Worthy, Jordan Addison, Michael Pittman, Quentin Johnston, Jacoby Myers. I'm going to guess that you'd probably take him ahead of everyone but Jacoby Myers.
What, Wan'Dale? No,
Yeah.
give me Xavier Worthy, give me Jordan Addison. There's some upside there. There's some intrigue there. Yeah, it depends on construction, I guess. In that, do I need that ceiling play?
Now,
yeah,
what if I told
struggle
you
to click him over like Jacoby Myers? That feels wild.
Now, what if I told you that the wide receivers behind him were Chris Godwin, Jaden Reed, and Juwan Jennings?
So I love myself some Juwan Jennings, so that might be tough. But
there's value in that area.
Yeah, I think basically what I've learned is that I like a lot of those wide receivers. So maybe I need to be building around running backs early. But yeah, like Chris Godwin is obviously a massive question mark. Jaden Reed, okay, do we know how often he's going to be on the field? Because when he plays over 80% of snaps, he's phenomenal. When he plays under 80% of snaps, he's difficult to get in your lineup. But yeah, it's pick your poison at that point, isn't it? Like none of them you're that confident about. None of them you feel like you've absolutely nailed. But you can talk yourself into the upside and the reason why you should be drafting any of those guys in that range.
Yeah.
Right, we're going to dive over to Denver now. This is just a feel-good one. J.K. Dobbins gets that slightly longer-term deal, 2 years, $20 million with $8 million fully guaranteed. Nice to see the guy, after so many horrendous injuries, get another payday. Does this impact your thoughts on Dobbins? Does this impact your thoughts on RJ Harvey? How do you feel about both of them and this whole backfield moving forward?
I mean, I love it for J.K. Dobbins, what he's gone through, and to get $8 million fully guaranteed. Like, this is a guy who's just made so little in his career and should have been able to make so much if he'd been able to stay healthy. Obviously, he's not going to beat the injury-prone sort of label at this point in his career, even though some have been freak injuries, some have been just annoying little niggles. Like, last year, someone landing on his foot, like, he's had horrendous luck. But last year, he was having a career year. He looked incredibly impressive. He ranked 4th in the league in rushing yards over expected per carry. He looked much better than RJ Harvey in just about every metric that you could put out there. And the team didn't want to trust RJ Harvey. And then this offseason, straight away, we got talk about how the Broncos were in on David Montgomery. They tried to usurp the Texans for that deal, but it didn't work out. They sniffed around on Kenneth Walker. They looked at Travis Etienne, but eventually they went back to J.K. Dobbins. Now, maybe RJ Harvey can carve out a bigger role this year, but RJ Harvey is currently going as RB22 on Underdog, 53rd overall. Dobbins was sitting at RB 43, 136th overall, and I have to imagine that gap closes significantly. And out of the two, I think I'd be more comfortable taking J.K. Dobbins because we know that he's more likely to get the goal line work.
At cost, absolutely. Like, to be honest, there's a consideration, an argument about who I'd prefer straight up. So if I'm getting almost 100 picks later, that's absolutely wild. I think RJ Harvey looked fantastic from a fantasy perspective once J.K. Dobbins went down last year, but that was because he ran incredibly pure on touchdowns. Higher percentage of his fantasy points came from touchdowns than any other back in the top 24 in terms of points per game, and a huge amount of receiving work. I think that this offense is going to be split, and I think that I'd quite like J.K. Dobbins at that cost. Obviously, we're expecting it's going to rise, but yeah, maybe you can get in and get some shares before that price does get up. Probably, what do you think? Settles in around running about 35, something like that?
I think that's probably kind of fair to assume. Let me just kind of give you an idea of the guys going around there. I mean, that's running back 35 a minute is Jadarian Price. It's kind of like the fringe area where Tony Pollard, Blake Corum, Kenneth Gainwell, Jordan Mason, Ja'Cory Krosky, Merritt are going. So yeah, I think backups. Yeah, I mean, I can make an argument for pushing them as high as Probably Tyler Allgeier, who's at RB31.
Yeah, that feels about right. So yeah, maybe even in that sort of RB3 category sort of flex place. Okay, let's dive across to the Raiders, who, look, we knew they had some moves to make, but I didn't quite expect them to be splashing the cash this freely. They signed Tyler Linderbaum to an absolutely bonkers deal, $29 million a year average, 3-year, $81 million deal. What's fascinating with that is that there is no tag language included. So the Raiders are likely going to be having to extend Tyler Linderbaum in about 24 months. They've also paid out for Jalen Naylor, 3-year, $35 million deal. Does this, I guess, register on the fantasy radar for you, or is this more about improvements for Fernando Mendoza, Ashton Genty, Brock Bowers, and this offense as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, this offensive line was just diabolical last year. The Raiders they couldn't move the ball, and when they did move the ball, it was frequently going to the other defense because Geno Smith was under pressure so often and really things were just jilted. So Ashton Genty frequently just did not make it to the line of scrimmage before being hit. And part of it could be put on him as a rookie, but part of it was just the offensive line was diabolical. So yeah, the Raiders had too much cap space. Like it's almost to a point where it was a real problem for them. So I don't begrudge them going out and spending this kind of money, but spending 50% more on the highest paid center in the league is crazy, and it kind of has to work out for them. But I think these are nice around the edges deals, and it's what you want to see. You want to see a rookie quarterback coming in with options to throw to in Jalen Naylor, Brock Bowers, of existing pieces there. Hopefully they can go and get somebody else good as well, and having somebody like Tyler Linderbaum who can take some of the pressure off him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can quite express enough how big this contract for Linderbaum was. You look at Creed Humphrey's the highest paid center in the league before this. He was averaging 18 million a year. Cam Jurgens at 17. Drew Dalman, who's obviously just retired, he was at 14. That was a big money deal. Connor McGovern's just signed a new contract, 30 million a year average. And then Tyler Linderbaum comes in over the top rope. It's incredible, unbelievable work from his agent to get that sort of money. But I think, to me, this is upside. Like, if you've got a young quarterback, the most important things are, do you have a stud pass catcher? Check. Do you have a competent center? Do you have a left tackle? Check. Do you have a good play caller? Check. Like, this is a great landing spot now for Mendoza. I still want to see him round out the rest of this offensive line. I still want to see him add another pass catcher, but I'm now confident that Mendoza, as an NFL quarterback less than fantasy, can at least hit the ground running and hopefully, add another quarterback to this tier of kind of competent long-term starters that we're always lusting after.
Yep.
Sticking in the AFC West, we're going to go over to the Chargers. But before we get there, if you are finding us for the first time, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. We're diving into best ball. And of course, rookie season is just around the corner. You're going to want to hit the subscribe button and not miss a second. The Chargers signed, a sanctuary favorite, let's call it as it is, Charlie Kolar, 3-year, $24.3 million deal. I think, did I win my bet that Charlie Kolar signed a bigger contract? I can't even remember who the player was that I had a bet with Tyler about, but never mind. Do you think
Rashad White, so that's still pending.
Well, there you go. I can tell you now, Rashad White's not getting $17 million guaranteed. That is for sure. Do we think this registers on any fantasy radar at all, or is this just a case of impact for the other guys?
No, it's definitely not going to, but I thought it was worth just mentioning quickly because it's going to hold back a Rhonda Gadsden from the kind of role that some people were projecting last year. Obviously, Gadsden had that incredible patch where he was just lighting up the league, but then it fell off over time as the offensive line fell off and they needed more blocking tight ends who could give them a little bit of work there. I mean, Charlie Kolar is an excellent blocker. He's a better pass catcher than he gets credit for. He came into the league as more of a pass catcher. He only became a blocker because Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely were just blocking the way for him. So he learned. He's an excellent kind of team character. I think that the coach, Jim Harbaugh, is going to love him. The effect for Hampton should be good. having another good blocker out there, but the effect for Ronda Gadsden feels like it's going to be bad.
Yeah, I think for me, this is really interesting because I think we're going to see a bit of a shift in this Chargers offense. They were one of the lowest rates of 12 personnel last year. They ran 12 personnel at 5.84%, average minus 6.14 EPA per game in 12 personnel. Like they weren't good at it. And I think that Charlie Kolar is one of the best blocking tight ends in the league. And I think that, yes, this isn't ideal for Gadsden because it could lead to him coming off the field. But to me, this is almost a good thing for Gadsden on a per play basis because it's really going to solidify that role. It's going to say, right, you're our move tight end. We're going to get you in the slot an awful lot more. We're not going to ask you to get in line. Hopefully he can still cross that kind of 60% snap share threshold that he can be relevant for fantasy. But I think that this should hopefully simplify his role. And as you said, for Hampton, his wheels up is only a good thing. Talking of 12 personnel, the Giants went and signed Isaiah Likely. Pretty big money for a guy who's never really broken out. 3 years, $40 million. Do you think this is a case of he has come in to supplant Theo Johnson? Or do you think this is we're going to see more 12 personnel and therefore we're going to see, less reliance on this wide receiver room, which is Malik Neighbors and a bunch of nobodies?
Well, I think you make a good point there, but I think it's John Harbaugh going back to the guy that he knew was clutch so often and that he knew that outside of structure, Lamar Jackson could rely upon. If Jackson Dart needs a big target outside of structure who knows how to move around and to find space and to go up and win a contested catch, that's Isaiah Likely. Isaiah Likely has made so many great plays, like even back to the last catch that he had for the Ravens against the Steelers, which should have taken the Ravens to like the playoffs. It was an absurd catch and it got lost because of Tyler Loop missing the layup kick seconds later. Like Isaiah Likely, the contract, it's basically about $500,000 more than the Ravens gave Mark Andrews on the surface of it, which kind of tells you that the Ravens weren't comfortable giving Isaiah Likely that much money. Contract negotiations apparently broke down between the two sides quite a while back now. And it's interesting that John Harbaugh is still kind of like has driven to get Isaiah Likely there. So maybe that was a front office thing, not valuing him. But going at tight end 21 at the minute, at an ADP of 172, that just feels like a smash. Yes, he's coming off like 20 yards per game on average last season, but his season never really got going because of a foot injury that he suffered in training camp last year. This is a guy who's had 15 touchdowns over the past 4 seasons. That's as many as Kyle Pitts. That's more than Evan Ingram in that period. Like Isaiah Likely knows how to find the end zone. He knows how to come up clutch.
Yeah, I think, look, we're calling Isaiah Likely a tight end. Let's call him what he is. He's a power slot. Like this is a guy last year, he didn't clear 12 inline snaps in the last 9 games he played. He played 55% of his snaps out of the slot last year with the Ravens. I think this is a big slot receiver. He's replaced Wan'Dale Robinson in this offense. And I think that, as you said, he's going to be utilized heavy in and around the red zone. I think we're going to see a lot of 12 personnel. I think Theo Johnson's basically going to have the exact same role that he had last year. Isaiah Likely's just come in to replace Wan'Dale Robinson. And I'm excited. I'm intrigued by this upside, but it's going to be cost dependent. If he's getting to a point where I'm having to draft him as like, anything more than a later tight end 2, tight end 3 type dart throw, I'm going to be turned off. But I'm at least intrigued if the price is pretty cheap in that kind of dart throw territory.
Yeah, I mean, for Dynasty, did it do anything for you?
It bumped him, definitely, but that was because I was convinced he was signing back in Baltimore, and as soon as they signed Mark Andrews, I dropped him down significantly. So, he's kind of doubled in price. He's worth a late second-round pick for me. He is currently my tight end 18. To give you guys in a tier with, he's in a tier with Terrence Ferguson, Hunter Henry, Colby Parkinson, Gunnar Helm. Like, it's not exactly household names that he's surrounded by, but there's at least some upside, at least some intrigue for me and kind of where I'm thinking and what I'm looking at.
I think part of it probably is like I'm a little bit higher because I also don't hate Jackson Dart.
But this is it. I do hate Jackson Dart as well. So I can't love anyone in this Giants offense because Jackson Dart's trash. Let's just call it what it is. Diving across to Atlanta, we have got the Falcons, who have made a lot of moves, and I'm not sure any of them are going to register on any sort of fantasy relevant radar this year. They've signed to the 1 year vet minimum contract. I expect him to potentially start the first few games of the year. We've then also got Jahan Dotson, Olamide Zaccheaus, and then look, Kevin Stefanski's gone to Atlanta. Go and get my guy. I need Austin Hooper. Let's go back to the early days of the Browns. Any of these pop up on any sort of fantasy radar for you?
Not particularly. It's just kind of worth touching on that these are the moves that Kevin Stefanski made straight out the door. These don't feel like the moves of a coach who thinks this is a team that's ready to compete. This feels like evaluation territory. We're going to put Jahan Dotson out there and Olamide Zaccheaus so that there's enough NFL caliber wide receivers that we get a good idea of the quarterbacks. If Michael Penix isn't good enough, then we can move to the other left-handed quarterback in Tua without having to change the blocking assignments and the offensive scheme stuff, because that stuff does matter. Having a left-handed and a right-handed quarterback can be tricky for the line to go between. So I think it's all just evaluation stage, and I don't think either of these quarterbacks in Penix or Tua will be starting for the Falcons in 2027.
Yeah, I feel like maybe I cursed myself. Like I said about 3 years ago when Penix was coming out of college, I love left-handed quarterbacks because I grew up with Michael Vick and I was dreaming over that. And then I've had to sit through Michael Penix struggles in the NFL, Tua looking horrendous. And let's not forget Dylan Gabriel, who couldn't compete a ball more than 5 yards downfield. So, yeah, maybe I've cursed the world, and that's why we're getting all these terrible left-handed quarterbacks.
Sounds like you actually just liked Michael Vick.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that is it. Diving across to the Bucs, though, they spent some big money replacing Rachaad White, bringing in Kenneth Gainwell from Pittsburgh. A decent money deal for essentially a 1B back at best. 2 year, $14 million. I don't think we've got any reports on the guarantees. Obviously, Kenny Gainwell was a league winner down the stretch last year. Do you think this is going to register on fantasy radar, or is this more of a taking work away from any upside and hope around Bucky Irving?
I think it will register, and part of that is that Bucky hasn't necessarily stayed healthy, hasn't shown that he's able to handle a full 3-down work role. There's little holes in Bucky's game enough where someone can chip away. And Kenny Gainwell, Steelers MVP last season, as you mentioned, he really had a lot of fantasy value down the stretch. He was RB20 in half PPR format, scored the 13th most points from week 10 onwards. But it is kind of easy to look at his season last year as an outlier because he had 114 rush attempts and 85 targets. Previously, he'd never been over 84 rush attempts or 50 targets. And Aaron Rodgers just absolutely latched onto him and really made him very relevant. But I think he's worth taking as a kind of clear running back too. The Bucs haven't brought back Sean Tucker yet. Rachaad White is still out there. I can't imagine they're going to bring back Rachaad White as well as Kenneth Gainwell. So if this becomes a clear 1A, 1B situation, then I like it plenty for fantasy, and Kenneth Gainwell could have real value if anything happened to Bucky.
Yeah, I think, look, I liked Bucky as a prospect. I was concerned that we wouldn't see that kind of pass protecting and receiving workload. And this is my worry, is that I think Bucky Irving has got great vision, and I worry that we're going to see those high value touches taken away from him. And it just cannibalizes, not a huge amount, but just enough to kind of feel the pain and feel the pinch. And that is a slight concern that I do have for him moving forward. And yeah, look, I think Kenny Gainwell, he's going to see high value touches. He's going to see spike weeks. Is he going to be consistent and reliable? That's my concern. I don't know how many weeks you're going to feel comfortable putting him anything more than maybe a flex play. But in best ball, when you don't have to worry about the lineup, I completely see the appeal.
Well,
straight up.
Your value, like late 3rd round pick, is that something that you'd push higher now based on what we saw out of him last year and this?
Yeah, I was really struggling valuing him because I liked him last year, but I just couldn't see a world where he was going to get paid. I thought teams would look at him and say, he was just a product of Aaron Rodgers. We're not going to treat him as anything in free agency. So for him to get this kind of deal, I was a little bit shocked by, I was a little bit surprised by. And so he has pushed up quite considerably. To give you exact numbers, I valued him as a 3. That was the equivalent to a late 3rd. He's now bumped up to a 7, which is kind of a late 2nd round pick. So yeah, he's almost doubled in value in terms of that cost. And to me, Bucky Irving has dropped down. He was my running back 9 in Dynasty. He's now my running back 15. So he's dropped down a tier and a half in terms of his valuation, because I do truly believe this is going to impact Bucky Irving quite considerably. The only other thing to touch on with the Bucs, K. Dotson re-signed 3-year, $30 million deal. 10 million average feels competent now for a good starting NFL player. Any interest there? He's going pretty cheap on Underdog and other things.
Yeah, I mean, tight end 31, going pretty much undrafted, really. And in Dynasty, obviously, you get him for probably most 3rd-round picks will do the job quite often. But I just think K. Dotton's a good guy to have as your tight end 2 or tight end 3, whether that's Dynasty or Redraft or Best Ball. Like, he's been over 80 targets in each of the last 2 seasons. I think you can kind of just chalk him up for 550 yards, and his fantasy relevancy then just comes down to touchdowns after that.
Yeah, and let's not forget Mike Evans walking out the door. There's going to be more target share floating around. I don't expect them to go out and add any huge options to this wide receiver room, having drafted Igbuka and McMillan the last 2 years. So there's probably going to be some targets floating around there for K. Dotton as well. The Cardinals brought in another back. Is Benson, Connor, now Tyler Allgeier. Tom, I was so hopeful and excited that Tyler Allgeier was finally going to get back to that rookie year where he was the lead back. Alas, it looks like he's not. Only managed a 2-year, $12.25 million deal. Is this just high-end backup handcuff territory, like where he's been essentially the last 3 years?
I think there's a world where he can take the lead job away from James Conner, but it's going to take some time. Obviously, this is a new coaching staff, but they did opt to extend James Conner before James Conner got out the door, which is noteworthy. And James Conner's been excellent for the Cardinals since he's been there, and he's done a really good job through his career of holding off the other running backs in backfields. 2 years, $12.25 million isn't nothing, but it's not fantastic. I was really hopeful that Tyler Allgeier, I mean, much like yourself, he's been one of our favorite guys to talk about as a buy low, as somebody that we wanted exposure to because he has so much potential. Like, you go back to 2025, he rushed for over 500 yards, scored 8 touchdowns, despite only seeing 8.4 carries per game. But you go back to 2024 and he was top 10 in explosive run rate and juke rate. He's good at the goal line. He's not a bad pass catcher. He's just blocked by James Conner. Now, James Conner's obviously getting older. If there's a very easy path to seeing Tyler Allgeier having a lot more work, but then what's Trey Benson's role behind that? Is Trey Benson going to eat into Tyler Allgeier? So it's probably the most deflating moment of yesterday outside of Tyler Linderbaum leaving the Ravens for me. But I still want some exposure to Tyler Allgeier because of the injuries we've seen to James Conner over the years.
Yeah, I think, look, my negativity around this, I guess, is more probably around disappointment and hope for what it could have been than what it is. It's still an okay situation, as you said. I think he's probably going to settle in 1A, 1B. And look, James Conner's finished a season once in his NFL career. He's now getting older. He's probably going to get injured. Tyler Allgeier has that lead back opportunity. I was just dreaming of him going to Seattle or Washington or something like that, where he could be the do-it-all 3-down back that we saw him be in his rookie year. And this just feels slightly deflating, and maybe that is just me lusting after what could have been. Now we touched briefly on your guy, Juwan Johnson, with the Saints. Kendrick Bourne signs with the Cardinals, 2-year, $10 million deal. I've hyped up Kendrick Bourne far too many times than I would like to admit. Any interest there, or is just a case of this dings slightly? Any upside for Wilson, McBride, Marv.
Yeah, I mean, unless there's something in the works for Marvin Harrison being traded, which would seem crazy on a rookie contract when you've got that cost control element and the upside there. It just seems wild. I think Kendrick Bourne's just one of those guys that for a new coaching staff, it makes a lot of sense to bring in one of those guys who's a good character, a good culture builder, and particularly when the quarterback situation is still a little unsettled. The word out of Arizona is that they're happy with Jacoby Brissett. They're happy with Gardner Minshew backing him up. But I don't know, maybe you just feel like you need some more grown-ups in the building and people you can count on. But for fantasy, outside of best ball, like deep sort of like correlated picks, I'm probably not interested.
Yeah, I think this is, to me, it's pure backup money. You know, $5 million a year is basically pocket change, and I think this is actually, we just needed to throw some bodies at this room. They haven't spent draft capital outside of Michael Wilson and Marvin Harrison in the wide receiver room. We got Tejon Palmer, that was a 6th round pick 2 years ago. Like they just need some bodies in the wide receiver room. I wouldn't be shocked to see him add one, maybe not, if not two, late round dart throws just to get some youth into the room. I don't think it should impact any of those big three receivers. Kendrick Bourne's got some nice versatility. I think he can play the slot, he can play the X, he can play the flanker. So to me, this just means that hopefully we're going to actually see Michael Wilson and Marvin Harrison both moved around the offense a little bit more, and not just saying, right, Marvin Harrison, you're our X receiver, we're going to go nowhere else. Let's dive over to the 49ers. We've got Mike Evans, 3-year deal, although let's be honest, this is a 1-year, $16 million contract. Any interest, any upside there?
I think there's definitely upside. I mean, the way anytime Kyle Shanahan's involved, you've got to have some level of interest in the offense. I think that last year was obviously a down year for them. They expected to have Brandon Ayuk. They expected to have Ricky Pearsall healthy. And Juwan Jennings was coming off a contract dispute, the weird knee injuries or whatever it was there. Like, things didn't go particularly well for the 49ers, but they were still a really good offense. They were still a really good team who put up plenty of fantasy points even when Mac Jones was starting for them. So I'm always interested in the Niners. I think that Mike Evans could quite easily have a good, strong start to the season because of the George Kittle injury, even though George Kittle's tracking to be playing early. But like, how often do we hear that? And then there's a slow start. As for Ricky Pearsall, I'm never really fully sold on him. Yes, I mean, Mike Evans coming off a career low in yards per reception last year. It was the first time we'd fallen below 13.5, all the way down to 12.3. But I think Shanahan's the kind of guy you want, somebody creative. I think Brock Purdy's good enough quarterback to make sure that they're getting the ball in the right situations. I think that'll be a big red zone threat for them. And wide receiver 34, that price just kind of feels pretty much perfect for me. I mean, I won't chase it too high. But in general, I think it's really nicely priced currently.
Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned about the overall volume. I think he is going to be slightly touchdown reliant. For best ball, that's not a bad thing. But I think in those managed leagues, whether that be Redraft, Dynasty, I'm a little bit concerned about having to select his name each and every week. I'd certainly rather just be able to play the spike weeks and move on from there. Talking of spike weeks, though, let's dive over to Seattle. We have got Rashid Shaheed signed a pretty big 3-year, $51 million deal. I'm fascinated to see the guarantees and how this is structured, because I do wonder if that 51 is doing a little bit of work there. Obviously, the Seahawks traded for him mid-season. He had some big plays on special teams, didn't really carve out a role on the offense. Do you think we could see him utilized more as a traditional receiver, or do you think they're paying him for his overall value in terms of manufactured touches and special teams?
Well, I think that's what the contract will probably reveal, because on the surface of it, it looks like they opted to pay Rashid Shaheed instead of Kenneth Walker. You know, like Kenneth Walker didn't get this much money on the surface of it, but is Rashid Shaheed, because of that returnability, because of what he offers deep, a value. I mean, look, wherever Rashid Shaheed went, you wanted a quarterback who was going to be comfortable pushing the ball deep. Last year, Sam Darnold was absolutely electric pushing the ball downfield. He completed 58% of his passes, 20 plus yards downfield. Nobody else completed over 52%. So I think it's really a good situation for him. He's going to have relevancy. Absolutely, this is a place for him to do it. It does upset me a little for Torrey Horton. I hoped he might get a clean runway, but maybe it's not a complete death knell.
Yeah, I love Torrey Horton. I was very hopeful, so it's frustrating there. But look, if we were talking earlier about boring options of Wan'Dale Robinson or things like that, if you can give me Rashid Shaheed at a discount compared to a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson, I'd much rather chase the upside of someone like Rashid Shaheed, because I think he's a good NFL wide receiver. I think he's explosive. And I think that if it ticks in this offense and if it truly clicks in, he could have one of those mind-blowing seasons, something like we saw from Alec Pierce last year, where you're not going to see huge volumes, but big yards, big touchdowns, and it could be fun.
Well, you go back to the beginning of the 2024 season when he was out playing Chris Olave. He looked better than Chris Olave in a ton of metrics. And that was when the Clint Kubiak relationship started. Now, obviously, this year he was traded mid-season, and it's quite hard to integrate to an offense. Yes, he had familiarity with Clint Kubiak, but it's hard to build a relationship with Sam Darnold on the fly. Now you give him a whole offseason. Yeah, I'm definitely comfortable enough taking him in the wide receiver 50 range. Like, I'd take him in the low 40s.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, haven't you? It's, what's the easiest thing to do when you get a wide receiver mid-season? Manufactured touches, special teams. Let's not ask him to do too much and pick up too much. So I'm happy chasing the upside. I'm happy chasing the ceiling. We're going to dive into some moves that have made the moves today rather. Before we do so, though, if you are watching, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you do not miss the upcoming content. It is going to be fantastic. So the Patriots spent big on Romeo Doubs, 4-year, $70 million deal. It felt like the Patriots needed to desperately add somebody to this wide receiver room. Do you think that he could be the target leader and the number one target for fantasy in this offense?
Perhaps. I think that Romeo Doubs is definitely a very reliable option. I think he's a better option than anything that they currently had on their roster. It was interesting to see reports surface from Patriots beat reporters, but this doesn't mean that they're out on AJ Brown. I think if you had a 1-2 of AJ Brown and Romeo Doubs, I'd feel very good about the situation. Like, as for Doubs, he's only 25, 202 career catches, 21 touchdowns, 59 games. Like, that's a good rate. 3 straight 600-yard seasons. Like, I just think that he is consistently productive. He's a willing blocker. He can play all over the field. I'm not sure he was always utilized like that to the best in Green Bay because of the wealth of riches they had and because of how they like to build out their offense. But I think that Romeo Doubs is going to be very good, and wide receiver 58 on Underdog feels like a value. As for throwing like a late second round or like a 2027 second round pick in Dynasty, much like Wan'Dale Robinson, he's not somebody anyone wants to trade for.
No, and for that reason, I quite like taking the dart throw because, look, I'm a huge Drake May guy. I believe in him. I believe in this offense. And if we're going to see Romeo Doubs walk into, 120 targets as a potential number one target on this offense, I like that. I hope that we're going to see him moved around a little bit more. He was sub 20% slot rate each of the last 3 years. Obviously, the Packers had Jaden Reed. If we can get him moved around in the slot more, get him some better releases, some open space, some manufactured touches, I'm really hopeful and excited. So yeah, I'm happy taking a dart throw at that side of cost. The final player we are going to talk about, though, Geno Smith back with the Jets. Look, this felt inevitable, didn't it, Tom?
Yeah, maybe not to the point where they did a late round pick spot just to assure that they got him. But when the Raiders were willing to pay most of his salary anyway, then what's to be lost by changing like 20, 25 picks in the draft? Go get him. And by all accounts, it sounds like Geno really wanted to be back in New York, where his career began anyway. I just think that last year wasn't a true iteration of Geno. Like, he got hit so quickly. His average depth of target was only higher than Aaron Rodgers. He led the league with 17 interceptions still, tied with Cam Ward for the most sacks at 55 overall. But he was still fairly accurate. Like, he ranked top 15 in accurate throw rate according to fantasy points. And I think that Garrett Wilson will have a nice enough season. It would be nice for them to go and find some other weapons for him. Everything's been about the defense so far for New York. Like, they've made some very strange signings this week. But look, I don't hate it. I think Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson will be fine.
I think, look, this is the perfect move for the Jets in my world, because what happens in 2026 literally doesn't matter at all. All they want is a path to a quarterback in 2027. And all you're looking for is a competent quarterback that can allow you to evaluate the rest of the roster. So go and get Geno Smith. Yes, I hope that Garrett Wilson is going to see a huge amount of volume. But to me, this is more about, what does Adonai Mitchell look like? Is he a receiver that the Jets will want to pay? Is he a receiver that the Jets will want to build around? Well, go and get a quarterback that you know is going to push the ball downfield. You know is going to try and squeeze the ball into tight windows and take those risks. And we will see, yes, do the Jets have two competent receivers, or do we need to go and find one next year as well as a quarterback? So I like the move for the Jets. I'm intrigued by Geno Smith for fantasy. Look, this is a great offensive line. Okay, it's got one big hole at the moment, but this is a great offensive line. He was the QB 13 in 2024. I don't think you can take anything that the Raiders did last year with anything but a pinch of salt, because that offensive line, the scheme, everything was just abysmal. So, yeah, prices, I don't know where he's going in Underdog, Tom, but I presume it's going to be probably late 20s in terms of quarterbacks. Like, I think you can do a lot worse than a late round dart throw on Geno Smith.
It was definitely late. Let me pull that up. I'm not sure yet. It looks like he didn't even have an ADP at the minute. So there were 29 quarterbacks being drafted, and he wasn't in there. Of course, you know, these early Underdog drafts are 20 rounds as well. So when you're not going in there, you've definitely done something wrong. I think people were definitely questioning whether he would find a good spot. But I would expect, I mean, he should definitely jump Ty Simpson. I wouldn't be surprised if also he could climb 2 or 3 spots higher and at least have an ADP.
Yeah, and, you know, in Dynasty, if you're desperate, I think you could probably go and trade a couple of thirds to get Geno Smith right now. And I think he's going to be a competent starter. If you need, you know, a QB4, maybe even a QB3, it makes a lot of sense to me. And that is it. Every single player that we wanted to cover in the first 36 hours of free agency, we have talked through. There are some pretty big names still floating out there, Tom. A few pictures on screen. Anyone that you're particularly intrigued by? Anyone you're excited to see? Hopefully a good landing spot for?
I mean, shout out Tyler Rashad White probably deserves a mention just because of what he can do in the pass catching game. Can he into something valuable that somebody else has? Juwan Jennings feels like the last good wide receiver domino to fall. David Njoku could be useful somewhere. I mean, Debo feels quite washed in a lot of ways. And then, of course, Kirk Cousins, where does he land? I mean, that part of me would like to see him go back to Minnesota just for the chaos of it all.
It feels like Kyler to Minnesota is almost established now, isn't it? There's no other landing spots left. It feels like that's a done deal because it's the only starting spot that's still out there. He's probably the best quarterback on the market. So I think that's almost preordained. I'm fascinated to see what's going to happen with these tight ends. You know, we've got Dallas Goedert and Njoku, Chikonkwe. There's a few other names floating around. I'm really intrigued to see where they end up. You know, San Francisco could be an interesting spot for the start of the year. I thought David Njoku was the perfect fit there. Let's see if I can will that one into.
I mean, give Malik Willis, David Njoku. Maybe Miami can't really afford it, but like I feel like that would be a nice outlet for him. Miami could do with something at tight end. They've not had a proper tight end in too long, and Darren Waller, of course, is a complete wild card.
Yeah, absolutely. But that is it. We have finished our free agency review. Remember, on your way out, hit that thumbs up, hit that hype, and of course, make sure you hit the subscribe because you want to keep it here in the sanctuary because we will help you win your fantasy leagues.